Recording in progress.
Welcome to the Messy Middle podcast and radio show presented by Mother and Founder Co. Each month, guests are invited to share their version of the messy middle and the lessons they've learned along the way. Whether you're in the messiness of growing a business, healing from trauma, or navigating the wild world of parenting, this show is a must. We are excited to celebrate the messiness of life and business with you. And now, let's settle in as host Jen Burwell connects us with today's guests.
Well, hello, and welcome everyone. I am so excited about this episode. I think it's going to be really powerful and a transformational hour, I know for myself personally. So I want to introduce my two guests today. We have Sasha Stair, executive leadership coach, founder of the Lead From Within method, and FinTech executive. Welcome, Sasha.
Thank you.
And we also have Danielle McGhee, Reiki master and founder of This Is Danielle. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us.
I am so excited. I've been looking forward to this conversation since, Sasha, you and I talked in January?
After Founders Meeting.
Yeah. So the first time I met both of you, which Danielle, I don't even think you know this because you guys co-presented right at the Foundress.
Yeah.
So I checked out the Foundress after probably 6 months of I don't know, these girls seem too cool for me. I don't know if I belong in the room. And finally in January I was like, no, we can do hard things. We can do scary things. So I convinced one of my friends to come, and January was the first Foundress meeting I ever went to. And it was because of your guys' talk, I was like, this is the right place for me. And it just felt like home. And it was literally exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. And it was so magical. And so thank you both for that experience. And Sasha, I got to chat with you a little bit after because we're going to get into the amazing book that you wrote. But then I just said, hey, I have this podcast if you're interested. And I was so excited when you said yes. So thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us. It's exciting for us too.
Absolutely. Did Lindsay and Coley hear that?
I hope
Make
so.
sure they heard
right?
that.
Founders plug.
I know. You guys were phenomenal. It was awesome.
Thank you.
So I always like to start this show to just give our audience a little bit of just background of where you came from, how you got to where you are today, which I know it's a long story. We're going to dive into pieces of it, but just from general background information, tell us a little bit about yourself. So who wants to go first?
Go for it, girl.
Okay. I am San Diego born native, so I like to call myself a Cali girl living in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Been in this Phoenix area for about 2 years now. And talk about messy. My career has been messy. My life has been messy. I have zigzagged all over the map. I went to San Diego State and studied marketing and communications, but came out and went into medical device sales. Ended up bouncing around in the sales world for a little bit. Ended up in nonprofit, running a nonprofit for a while. And then ultimately landed in the mortgage world, which is super exciting. And have really been in that space, mostly with fintechs, which are really just organizations that are helping from a software standpoint to enable the mortgage business to do what they need to do to service their clients for probably the last 12 years. And during that time, unfortunately, have come across probably more bad leaders than good. And really was intrigued and curious by why that's the case. And it got me into this mode of starting to write. And I had a dear friend, Kaylee, who started Soul Excellence Publishing, which is a fantastic company. And she came to me and said, hey, I'm going to publish this book. You know, COVID hit. People are struggling with leading through the pandemic. Do you want to co-author? And I thought, oh, perfect, because I've been wanting an outlet to express some of my thoughts, opinions around leadership and, you know, what causes us to not have the tools that we need to lead more authentically. And so I co-authored that. And then another one came, and then finally I was like, Kaylee, I got to write my own book. And that's kind of the journey that brought me to authoring The Inside Job, Master the World Within to Lead the Future of Corporate. And it says corporate, but really it's not. It's for everyone because we all need to master that world within. And I've really been focused on not only writing that book and sharing the messages within it to help people understand the message behind it, which we can talk about in a little bit, but also then taking it back in almost like FinTech is a lab for me to practice and see like what does work, what doesn't, and how do we help really shape the future of leadership in corporate. So besides being, crazy owner of 2 dogs and cats and being married and having an amazing daughter, that's it. That's all I got.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah, I know.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, what did you think you'd be when you grew up?
Sitcom actress. No kidding. And by the way, I didn't actually know this. My mom and I were at some event and they were like, did you ever ask your parents what you wanted to be when you grew up so you could figure out like what you really inspired to be or aspired to be, excuse me. And I looked at my mom because she was with me. I was like, Mom, what was it? And she told me that. And I was like, no way. I would have never pinned that. I don't know what I wanted to be back then, like what I remember wanting to be, but apparently that's what she said I did. And it doesn't surprise me. She's a music teacher and a concert pianist. She writes all of her own music. She's a phenomenal artist.
Oh my gosh.
And and she always had me in everything on stage. Theater, musical, like regular theater, musical theater, tap dance, ballet, etc. So it doesn't surprise me that that was the answer, but I had no idea.
That's so funny.
So
maybe it was her answer for you.
yeah, right. She's like, you would have been really good at this. Why didn't you do it? Yeah,
She would have been like opera singer. That's what she would have wanted.
possibly.
Yeah.
And I did study opera before I changed to business, but this is gonna sound terrible. I'm a control freak, so if I'm not like in charge of, then it doesn't really work for me. And I thought, theater, man, you were just constantly being directed and told how you were not in the right place, not the right tone, not the right time, whatever it might be. And I'm like, that's going to drive me nuts. I can't do that. I need to go into leadership instead so I can tell other people what to do. And then I'm like, wait, that's not leadership either. Shoot.
Life is a journey. That's some great self-awareness, though, to realize, like, hey, I need to be a director or conscious leader, I think is where you end up.
Evolved too.
Yes. So, Danielle, how about you? Where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Southern Virginia in the middle of nowhere and like cutest, quaintest little town. You were talking about someone going to school after you, like 12 years. Like my whole family, like I was in the grow up in the middle of nowhere by the farms with like my grandmother went to the same high school I went to. Like my mom and dad had the same teachers that I had. Like
I didn't even know this.
Yeah. So it was like real down home.
Yeah.
I hated it as a child, appreciate it so much now as an adult. Went to San Diego for 10 years after I left DC after college. Did that whole East Coast, hated being so buttoned up, riding the metro every day. Fled to San Diego so I could ride my bike and be barefoot on the way to work. And actually landed and was doing nonprofit work for a long time. Got to a point where I was like, I'm never going to be able to do what I want to do in this space, truly. And started with a startup in San Diego that actually grew from like 45 people when I first started to over 450 when I left.
Wow.
And so throughout that process of about a decade of doing these huge seminars all over the country, we're an educational business seminar company.
Oh, cool.
Personal development, all the things wrapped into it. As the company grew, I got pushed into roles that I had no business doing because we were just organically growing, right? And so I got to learn and do and lead in all these new and different ways, which was so beautiful. But I burnt out. Like I was traveling, I think one year I was 90,000 miles a year on the plane. Like it was insane every single weekend, sometimes multiple times per week, flying, setting up these huge 200, 300, 400 person seminars. Needless to say, my nervous system was like, we're tapped. And so along that path brought me to what are some other things I can do to actually feel good in my body? Because going to bougie dinners and drinking wine every night was like my solution for a bit, right? And that was not the solution. And then I would go work out really hard in the gym thinking that would help, but my cortisol levels were already through the roof. So I just felt like tired, anxious all the time. And so I found myself in San Diego at a Reiki share circle essentially at my yoga studio. And that was in 2013. That was like a really tough year for me. I was like having tons of issues with anxiety, stress, just like I loved what I was doing, but I was like, I can't do it this way anymore.
Yeah.
Went to that circle literally, and this is where it gets real woo-woo, so buckle up. I went to that circle. I went to that circle and ultimately became my two teachers, an older married couple in San Diego. One of them was working on me, and I literally had this like, oh my God, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it made zero sense at the time. I was like, I'm supposed to do this? No, I'm like trying to like run this, kind of like want to rise up in this company, you know? So right after that, I'd only had 15 minutes of work done to me. I said, I want to get certified in this modality.
Wow.
I don't know why. I just do. Started my journey at that point. And so over the course of 10 years, studied, practiced, kind of like moonlit as a Reiki practitioner. I would work out of people in my home. I would do workshops and circles in San Diego, but it was very separate from corporate Danielle in heels on stage business life. And so finally in 2018, it all kind of came crashing down, and I was like, I have to make a choice. I was either going to get promoted to take on more responsibility within the company, or it was time to really branch out and do what I knew I was like called to do.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up here. Moved to Phoenix about 2 years ago. And yeah, I've been building and growing my business here ever since. And it's been such a blessing. So
That's such a cool story.
yeah.
So I have two follow-up questions. One is, when you had that, you were at that decision point of, you know, it's like a fork in the road. You can go one way or the other, and potentially there's no wrong answer. Take us through that process of like how you decided which way to go and what that looked like.
Absolutely. And this is something I use with my clients often. It's like we have free will and choice, right? And we get to look and see what this next step is. And I always say, if you're looking and you're visualizing that next step and it feels constrictive, it feels like you're putting on clothes that are too tight, and it doesn't feel like it's like in your biggest and best growth, but then you can look in another direction and it may be scarier. It may have more fear involved, but it feels like you're cracking open. It feels like there's expansion on the other side. And for me, it was almost like I was going to bubble up and scream, even though I loved the people. I had obviously there were things that happened with leadership. And of course I didn't get, you have those moments when you're, especially at a startup, where you can have tension and friction and all these things, but it was a family, because we were all in the trenches together. So it was like hard to make that decision, but I knew this is what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right. And then the messy middle came in, where you have to deprogram 12 years of like corporate business. This is how I'm going to think and do and be in this box, to, oh my gosh, I have to unwind all of that. And how do I show up as a leader in this space? Yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful. I love that analogy and that visualization of like, because it really does, at least in my experience, feel like that. Like when you're like, oh, this is a safer option, but it feels like constricting and like you can't really breathe. But then the other option, it almost feels like it's a little bit too big for you, but it feels like you have space.
Or you're jumping and you're hoping the parachute's packed.
Right. Right. And you can't really see what's on the other side.
Yeah.
That's so cool. My second question for both of you is, how did the two of you meet?
Ooh, this is a good one. Do me start it? Do you want to start it?
You go.
So we actually met in San Diego 10 years ago, I think.
At least.
I was starting to I was in the nonprofit world, like I said before. I switched over to the startup world, and I was like, I still want to be involved in the nonprofit world. Sasha at the time was helping run an organization in San Diego called Jeans for Justice, and they were organizing a group to run the Rock and Roll Half Marathon in San Diego. So I was like, I'm going to do that, and that's where she and I originally met.
Wow.
Just like training in that space. She was running the same year I was running. And you get to know people when you're running, 8 miles on a Saturday morning. And at that time in our mid-20s, so very hungover, running 8 miles on a Saturday morning and learning and raising money and getting to see that side. But then we ended up serendipitously, kind of our lives. Obviously, we both moved here around the same time.
That's what I was thinking.
Not until, she was with her husband. It was a choice. I came here for a partner I was dating at the time. So it was just.
And different, like she came from San Diego. I had already routed to Florida and DC and then back to Phoenix because my career has taken me like
all
a pinball machine. Yeah.
Totally. And then also that happened. Then she introduced me to a mentor we worked with that we both have a lot of love for, who was pretty much our mentor in both the mystical, spiritual, business coaching world for a very long time. She introduced me to her, and then Sasha actually held me through a retreat experience. Then Sasha came back years later, and I was helping run retreats, and I got to hold Sasha through a retreat experience.
How cool.
So just we always say we've came together to like be in each other's lives in these really beautiful, profound ways.
That's so special when that happens.
100%.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So a little bit about my background. So I used to be the director of a campaign at the Leukemia Lymphoma Society called Team in Training. So I trained athletes. Well, our coaches train them, but I come from a family of endurance athletes. And so I would help people who would raise money for cancer research, and they would do half marathons, triathlons, and century rides.
Yeah.
So I totally understand the bonding that comes with training for an endurance marathon. And I have myself many memories of running hungover, which some of those runs were like my best runs ever. Like,
Well, you're in
hungover.
your 20s. It's
That's
like
true.
nothing takes you down.
get a
You're
bagel.
Superwoman.
You get some caffeine and you go.
Yes.
Correct.
But if I were to try to do that now, I would probably die.
And just to
Correct.
clarify, you say endurance, but for me it was torture. So I appreciate there are people out there where their bodies are built for that, but for me it was like I did 2, I got my medals, and I'm done. We're good.
That was my joke that I ran half marathon and I haven't ran since.
Yeah, correct. Unless someone's chasing me with a sharp object.
Right. I mean, it's not fun at all. I mean, my stepdad has run over 30 marathons. He's
Oh
done
my
all the
gosh.
big ones like Boston, Chicago, all the things. And I ran cross country in high school and then track, but mostly like because that's what we did as a family. Like we would go on vacation and run. Like that was my parents' idea of fun. It has never been my idea of fun, but I was so in this world and the relationships I built. It was all about the social thing. So I'm
Yeah.
still very connected to a lot of those people that I ran and did races with. But my husband, I met him through that program. So his sister's a cancer survivor. She was our honored hero. I knew her before I knew him. And in San Francisco at the Nike Women's Marathon, I met him that weekend. And then I would say, we started dating. I broke up with him a few times. He was very persistent. Then, the rest is history. Out of that, though, is when we first started dating, he had never been endurance runner. His family's not. His sister just had this goal, like if she can make it through treatment, this is what she wanted to do, because there were firefighters, chocolate, and Tiffany necklaces at the end of the race.
Oh,
So-
we did it all wrong.
I know. You just had to go a little more north.
I was like, did we?
No, we did not get
Did
that.
I miss
We-
that
we got-
booth?
I got a medal and a beer.
I know. The rock and roll races are a lot of fun, but the
And
Nike
shin splints.
Women's.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Those are awful.
Yeah.
But in order to date me, I said, well, you have to run to my husband. And he was like, oh, how hard can this be? So we signed up for a marathon in Hawaii. He was in for Hawaii, right? Like, who doesn't want to go to Hawaii?
Except
But
for
that
the
was hill-
humidity.
I was like, and the hills.
No,
And the
thank
hills.
you.
And we ran on the freeway.
Oh.
It was, but so it was a horrible experience for him. And he was like, that's the one and done. I've never run another marathon either. Halves are much better than fulls. But anyways, so it was just funny. He's like, I loved you so much that I ran a marathon.
That's
10 years
courtship.
ago. I know. I'm like,
That's amazing.
yeah. So it was,
Mine stalked me at a company that we both worked at in the kitchen until I said yes on a date.
see, persistence.
It seems to be a theme.
That is a theme. So bringing it back to why we are here today, I want to talk about the book that you wrote, Sasha,
Yeah.
The Inside Job. So a couple things. One is this is and I'm holding the book for those of you who can't see, this is the very first book that I have been able to read on a plane since having children, because my children are finally old enough to sit and be quiet in a seat. So it was like glorious, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. But also, much more importantly, this is an incredible, incredible book. And I just got so much value and insight, and it reads like so personal, but also I can totally see the side of you that's like, here's some practical advice and tips on like how to actually do this. Because I think a lot of books, that's where they can fall short, is like, here's the concept, but then you're like, how do I do it? And so the second piece of this is both of my parents, my mom and my stepdad, they had corporate careers their whole life. They worked in accounting and finance for big corporations, and they hated their lives. I could resonate, and I could see it from my perspective as a child through the stress and anxiety that environment caused for them. Impacted me so much that I knew going to college I would never work for a corporation. Like that was I don't care who or where I work for. So I've worked for large nonprofits, I've worked for small business, I've worked for startups. I, to this day, have never worked for a corporation because of the awfulness that I saw my parents live through. And my mom especially, so when she was pretty high up in her company in finance role, and just the things, and some of it, like, she's not telling us, right? We're kids, but you overhear things of them talking.
Sure.
And as an adult, she's shared stories of just the rooms she's had to be in, the abuse she's had to endure, the things that people say. And so it changed the path of my life, because early on I was like, well, I'm going to be a CEO of a big company. Like, that was my like little dream. And even in high school, and then as I was watching my parents, it's like, I don't want that, because what it meant was parents who were stressed all the time, who would wait for us to go to bed and then work again until midnight, who had to go through like rounds and rounds of layoffs, and just the anxiety of all of that, and figuring out like who and what. Just it was like as a family, we're constantly on pins and needles. And I mean, there were good times too, and both of them had good leaders. But to your point, I would say the majority of them were poor leaders, and it affected them personally and our family dynamic. So reading this was very emotional for me. And there were a lot of points. Part of it is sad to me, because it's still happening, right? This is relatively recent. So let's start from the beginning. Kind of tell us the premise of the book, why you started to talk a little bit about it, like what inspired you to write it?
Yeah. So I'll back up even a little further, only because it will provide context for who I am as a person. When I finished it and I saw how short it was, my immediate reaction was like, oh my gosh, it's not good enough. Shocker. Like, we all do that, right? And what I realize now is I keep hearing so many people that say, I'm so busy, I pick up a book, I'm like a serial reader, I've got 10 books by my nightstand, but I never finish them. But yet everyone seems to be able to finish this one. Yeah. And it was because I checked my ego and was like, what's in there is what's meant to be. Do not add fluff. Do not make it bigger. It's fine. It will work. And so I love that you said that you were able to get through it. Obviously, having children a little older that are willing to sit still long enough, or maybe you sedated them. I don't know. It's okay. I don't judge.
I'll never tell.
But I love that you mentioned that, because I do really bring it back to people who are thinking about, or who have written a book and want to put it out in the world. Like, the length of it doesn't matter. It's the core content and the message you're trying to give to others. And the message I wanted to give to others, to come to your recent question, was we can't control everything outside of us, right? We can only control what's going on inside. And everything I was taught in business school or by other leaders was never related to managing what was going on inside, what life experiences I had that had shaped me, my DNA, how I was raised, different experiences I was going to have as an adult and have to navigate, quite frankly, with very few tools or resources, because I didn't know that they existed, because we didn't get taught that growing up. Also being taught, and at no discredit to my parents, because I think it's because they were raised the same way, you don't really talk about your emotions and you don't express your emotions. And so therefore you shove them down. And newsflash, in case you haven't paid attention, they come out anyway. And they come out typically in really ugly, unhealthy ways when we don't tend to them. And so I kept feeling like there's all these great books out there that tell you, like, you want to start a business, here's what you need to do. Like, if you're in business and you want to think about scaling, or you want to be a better leader, like, and look, no discredit again, because they're amazing and I read their books, the Simon Sinek's, the John C. Maxwell's of the world, the Brene Browns of the world. Like, they're great authors and they write really good inspirational leadership concepts. I felt like we got to dig deeper. And then to your point, I'm a very masculine person. I've worked on my feminine. Danielle, we'll talk about that later. She's helped me unravel and unveil my feminine. But my masculine side is like, you can't just be inspired and then be like, great, I read this incredible book, and then now what? Like, I need people to read it and go, I can do something. I can change. Like, I want this book to be transformative, but it's still a choice. So I try to be really inviting in the book of, here are things I've gone through. Here's what I would change if I could, right? Because we all have situations where we wish we could have done it maybe a little different, or maybe had more emotional intelligence at that time so we didn't snap the way we did. But also, like, what are practices that you can integrate in your life right now to be more self-aware, more emotionally intelligent, more comfortable with failing and talking about failure.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all things that I had, again, seen not happening in corporate that I felt were at the root of why so many things occur in corporate that do create those negative environments that your parents unfortunately endured, that many of us still endure. In the book, and I promise I'll try to keep my cussing to a minimum, but beware, I am married to a veteran Navy. So it's not always easy for me, but I call it the real shit show, because the truth is you're going to go through experiences, regardless if it's corporate or not, that people don't talk about more openly or enough or often. And no one gives you those tools to navigate through those situations. And even if I would have had the tools, I don't even know if I would have done it perfectly then, right? Because I was still growing up in corporate, figuring it out. So again, I really wanted the book to be both inspirational and raw and like, hey, this is who I am and this is what I've been through in my life, but also here's what I've learned. And if I could go back and do anything different, here's where I would change things. Not because I regret, but only because you look back in the rearview mirror for a short time. It's smaller than the windshield for a reason. And here are exercises you can use right now to shift things if you're ready.
I love it. I love that part of your book where you do talk about like, here's where I made mistakes. Here's what happened. Here's some situations. Here's what I would do differently. And that one situation in your book, The Real Shit Show, or Shit Show 101, I think is what you called it, where you were put in a really difficult situation and you spoke up, right? And you had this moral and ethical dilemma of, do I report it to HR? What do I do? And I won't give everything away in the book, but you had a really difficult decision to make and some reflection on like what you would have done differently or how it, who knows how it would have turned out, I think is so helpful to really think through, because you don't expect to be in those situations, right? Like no one in business school ever tells you like, these are some potential situations you might find yourself.
Yeah.
And so you have to, and I love that you brought in that real life of like, it's not just like, do I do the right thing or not? It's, do I lose my paycheck and my, financial security? What is it like the rest of the industry going to think about me if I make some different choices? And so that was really helpful to walk through. So for perspective on how do you really like embody the things in this book that you talk about, of like, how do you make those mindset shifts? How do you make a choice that feels better in your body, right? That's not so constricting. What are some tools that you've used to do that?
Great question. Very loaded question. But, and this is not something that, again, someone was like, hey, here are all the things, go do. I had to explore and through trial and error figure out what worked for me. And I believe that is true for everyone else. But hopefully in sharing some of the tools I've used, it will give people inspiration or ideas to try if they haven't already. At the larger, bird's eye view, it's a healing journey. And in the book, I talk about like your journey for yourself is the most important journey you're ever going to be on, right? So why not take the time to really understand who you are and where you want to be and what that gap is between A and B and what you need to do to get there. And so a lot of the modalities I tried early on were more traditional things you would think about. I went to therapy. I'm totally open about being in the messy. So I have been through 3 different scenarios of sexual violence in my life, starting at a very young age, at 5 through 21 years old, and had an alcoholic father. Those 2 are not related, just for reference. And then, divorced family and all the things that come with that. And people have been through far, far worse, but I think any type of trauma that you go through, traditional therapy definitely has a place. And it did help me unpack a lot of what was going on. And I also then went into Al-Anon, which is the same 12-step program as AA that you would go through if you were alcoholic addict, but it's for loved ones of. And what you learn in that process is you grow up with a parent who has, unfortunately, those, problems or a disease, as they like to call it. And you learn that you're really good at managing chaos because you're constantly taking care of them. You're playing the parent, they're playing the child. And then you don't realize that later on in life as an adult, you'll actually go create chaotic situations because you're so comfortable managing them and it feels safe. And so it took going through that program for me to become aware of it. And that's one of the chapters in the book is really like, how self-aware are you? And also how are you aware of your surroundings and other people and not only how you impact them, but how they impact you. But Al-Anon really changed my self-awareness when it came to, wow, I'm creating these situations in my life. Like,
Yeah.
and that helped me unpack that. And I ultimately really realized, oh my gosh, there's so much more out there. And so I started reading every self-development book under the sun, and ultimately found myself in a yoga studio in Del Mar. The mentor that Danielle was mentioning earlier, her name is Cindy. She's a phenomenal woman. Started a business called Feminine Mastery, and she was just at the precipice of starting that business, and she's in this yoga studio and she's going to host this workshop. And I'm like, yes, I'm in. Like, but what am I going to get out of it? Like, still in total masculine corporate brain. Little did I know that that would turn into one-on-one coaching. It would turn into going on self-development retreats. I would ultimately host those retreats with her. Then Danielle did, right? So a lot of different methodologies. And it was later that I ran into Reiki, and I got to tell you, I mean, I would say out of all of them, Al-Anon and Reiki have probably been the most profound to me. And there's so many more I could list. I mean, I've done EMDR. It's incredible. But Al-Anon really just opened my eyes to seeing blind spots, right? Like I could not see that, and I needed to see it in order to make a change. So that was huge for me. Reiki, because I am, and I try really hard not to be, but because I'm a perfectionist and a control freak, and I'm constantly trying to manage everything, I need a scenario where I can tap into the subconscious and let it take over. And what I actually learned through doing EMDR is a lot of what we do day to day is in that 20% of your conscious, but like there's 80% of your subconscious that's sitting there that needs to catch up with all the healing work you're doing consciously, but we don't tap into it often because people are like, oh, we don't talk about that and we don't do those things, and how could that possibly go hand in hand with like how I show up as a leader in corporate, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is it does.
Yeah.
And Reiki allows me a chance, A, to lay down and take a nap sometimes. That's amazing. To be held, to receive, which is the feminine, which I am not good at, and to allow my body to get to a state where it is so calm, like the nervous system has come, and I already have low blood pressure. You'd think I have high, but I actually have low. But my nervous system's not calm. I can feel it frayed, right? So in those moments, I get that permission to bring that nervous system down to a level where my body can start to heal itself. And yes, I have a practitioner, and I trust no one as much as I trust this woman next to me when it comes to healing and a lot of things. I couldn't say everything because my husband would be like, hey, wait a minute.
What about me?
Or my mom or other people. But anyway, but you know, when you find the right practitioner who's doing the work, because A, they're gifted, and B, they're so passionate about it, and you put yourself in their hands and you allow that experience for your body, it changes you. Like it's one of those inexplicable, mysterious ones that you're never, even though science has been able to explain a lot of it, and I'm sure Danielle can share that, there's some that's not explainable, and that's okay. Right. It's magical, it's mystical, it's mysterious, and that's like, I like a little bit of unknown, not a lot. But it's a beautiful practice. And so, you know, long story short, like I said, loaded question, a lot of different modalities that have really helped me unpack, unravel, and unveil so much to myself so that I could not only write that book, but explain to people, how do you become more self-aware? How do you become more emotionally intelligent, etc.
I love it. Such a beautiful answer. And what I've found from helping people heal from trauma, my own trauma, is to exactly what you said, is like, there's no one modality. Like, it's not a one and done, and it's a different combination of things for different people. There's some commonality of things, but it's like finding those pieces that work best for you. And I think that's sometimes the most frustrating part for people is 100%. Like, I just like, you know, you want to go into a doctor, get a prescription, be cured. And that's just not how it works. So Danielle, for those of us who are not familiar with Reiki, I am very familiar, but for the audience that is not, tell us a little bit about what is the practice, what is it like, anything you'd like to share about it.
Absolutely. I love that you shared. There are so many modalities that allow us to crack open and see. I always say it's like peeking out the window. Oh, there's a new perspective I haven't seen before. And I always tell people, I'm like, Reiki may not be your first stop. It may not be your last stop, but can you go explore all these different ways to get in touch with what your body is trying to say to you at all times, and go find the way that language speaks to you. So maybe it is the language of Reiki, or maybe it's shamanic breath work, or maybe it's all these other different things we can do that allows you to find that stillness and to go into that sacred pause because so many of us forget to slow down and to be more mindful throughout our day.
Yeah.
So Reiki, we can explain it a couple different ways. I always say it's a fun one to break down to people who are like, say what? And that was me. You know, I was
Right.
corporate girl, like riding the ladder, and I, you know, have my own stories of leadership and the whole mess of things that totally unraveled for me too, losing my kind of trust in the corporate way that, well, in the leadership in the corporate world, right? Like what was happening now and the leadership programs we were going through, I was going through different things. I was getting trained in stuff. And then the people I worked with were still exhibiting the same behaviors. And you're like, okay, it's a to-do list of things to do, but you're not shifting and changing from like the embodiment standpoint of showing up differently.
Right.
And it's crazy to me to think that people who are running larger companies or in certain leadership positions think that you just like literally check your baggage at the door. Like you check your baggage at the door. You don't bring it to work with you. I don't understand why she would get upset about that. Or she seems triggered today. And I'm like, you know, you don't know what that person went through X, Y, and Z to sit in front of you in a meeting that morning. And it may have been tragic.
Right.
Right. And we are not those human beings, and to change the language around what it means to be a fully integrated human being, to be fully seen every single day for who you are and what you're going through, and knowing that the person across from you has all the tools to actually sit with you, witness you, be in that space. Because anyone who's been held through that process is going to show up amazingly at work. They're going to show up and feel empowered and like they can be fully themselves, which means their creativity turns on, which means you get innovation in your company. Like, these are the things I thought we wanted, but we're not going the route to get there, right? So we got a little worked up in the car on the way over here talking about the things that can shift in that arena. Anywho, Reiki is a beautiful practice. It's a Japanese hands-on healing practice. That's where it originated from in terms of the lineage that I studied. That being said, hands-on healing work has been done since the dawn of time. It's been written about in every ancient text. This is just the way and the modality I chose to study it. You go through a training process of learning about the energy centers in the body, your chakra system, how to work with those and to bring intention to them and to calm the body down. So in a session, essentially, you go through, you're lying down and it's wonderful. You're in a cozy space. There are good smelling scents, you know. And I'm working down the body. I'm literally lightly laying my hands on your 7 main energy centers, as well as your legs and your feet and your hands and your arms. This process puts you into such a calm state that your body, like she was saying, if you study in like Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, understanding what we can go to those heightened states of consciousness, like we have the science behind it now, our body starts to heal and repair itself. It's like, oh, okay, this, you know, frazzled woman is ready to sit for a second and put everything to side so I can go in and like repair everything that needs to happen, right? And so if we can just let ourselves be held in that state, crazy, beautiful things can happen in our body. You know, the majority of my clients start sleeping better. A lot of them start eating differently and they don't even know why, moving their bodies in new and different ways. They feel safe in their bodies, a lot of them for the first time, because a lot of us have gone through these heightened things that have happened throughout our lives that don't allow us to get out of fight or flight. And so it's just this gorgeous practice to use to let our bodies tell us what's still going on. And then, of course, the really, you know, woo-woo side, the really fun magic spirit side is, you know, some of us have different gifts in that area, too, of things we can see within the body. And so really tapping into that, too, to work with your clients to help them have more compassion for themselves.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you work with a lot of high-level leaders, executives. Is that a lot of who your clientele is?
Majority have always been very type A. We attract who we are, right? This is like, you know, it was my path. And so, yeah, a lot of leaders in business, a lot of entrepreneurs, people who have kind of paved their own way. So yeah, it's been fun to be ex-military, like people coming out of that space and wanting to, you know, a lot of people who were high ranking in the military then go out and go get these really cool corporate jobs. but man, they've seen a lot and their bodies are holding on to a lot.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And so to hold that, and then also working with companies and other organizations to bring this work to that space as well.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
So would you say is like the biggest challenge or resistance that you typically see early on with a client? Is it like the need to know? Is it the control part? Like what's the resistance that you most commonly see?
I love this question. This morning, actually, I was in session and I made a joke with one of the gentlemen I'm working with right now. He's in I like to work with people in 3 to 5 to 7 session blocks so we can actually really dive into the work. And we were laughing. We're like, at the beginning, his inner toddler comes out and doesn't want to settle, doesn't want to release, doesn't want to sit and receive the work because it's scary to be still.
Yeah.
When we're still, our minds can go wherever they want to go. When we're still, sometimes trauma comes up in the body. And scary,
Yeah.
right? To be in that space. And it's also scary to receive and be held if we never had a really healthy relationship with that as a child.
Absolutely.
A lot of people I've worked with have mentioned to me as a child, they weren't nurtured. They weren't told I love you. They weren't held when they fell. That's so many people's stories. It's a lot of men's stories as well. And it's devastating to me.
Right.
So to be able to sit and receive that can feel very uncomfortable for the nervous system. And yes, there's always, did you see anything? Because I do have that gift.
Yeah.
Did you see anything? Like my past life? Like, it's so funny. And we never know what's going to come through in session. So it can be a myriad of things. So it's just, those are usually the two resistance points of also, since I do work with people who have a lot of them, like we've just spoke about, our higher level people in companies have had executive roles, have never been exposed to the work, but because of my background, they feel safe to come explore it. So they'll be like, I don't know what this shit is, but let's try it. Right? It's like nothing else has worked. And this is what we're talking about in the corporate world. When I used to go pitch to companies in San Diego, it's like, you show me how your current system is working for stress reduction in your employees and tell me if it's working.
Right.
If it's not working, then we got to try something different. So I'm asking you to step outside of the box for a minute. Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question. I'm wondering, both of your perspective is healing possible inside the current corporate environment? And how my personal opinion is I feel like a shift collectively is happening. I feels like it's picking up exponentially, which is reassuring for me some days when I struggle to find faith or hope in the human race. That's what I go back to. But I'd love to hear from you guys with your experience and what you see. Is healing and a more healthy culture possible for corporations?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the day we lose hope for that is the day we should stop trying to live, because what's the point, to be honest? And it's not just corporate, it's just in life, right? And I think companies and in general, where we are as a society, have made strides towards getting better. And I think some of it has been impactful and has been effective. And I think some of it, to be brutally honest, is checking the box and still needs to be at a deeper level. A lot of what I notice is leadership at the top tends to stay away. So maybe my VPs and below will go through these programs, but do I, as a C-level, need to go through the program? You do. Yeah. And not just, I got an executive coach, or I went through a leadership training, or I did a healing retreat. Like, did you really do the work? Did you really actually show up raw, vulnerable, and let someone dig in? Even if it's in private, that's fine. You don't need to share with the whole world in a corporate setting. But if you're not doing it and embodying the work and displaying that, and you're asking your employees to, you create a very strong disconnect in your culture of inauthenticity. While you're sitting there saying you're being authentic, you're creating a more healthy environment. BS. Everyone has to be doing it. And I think some of that is just part of the evolution and the journey, and we're making strides, but we're not there yet. And some of it is people that are really, unfortunately, just trying to check the box to say, look what we do for employees to make things better. And they're not really actually trying to make things better for whatever reason, which is disheartening. But I do see more, especially startups are taking that in and putting it in their DNA from the beginning. Like day one, this is a part of our culture, and we are going to find a way to hold true to that no matter how hard it gets as we grow. And I'm seeing more success with companies that start with it as a part of their DNA than ones that have to transform when it's not originally.
Absolutely. Danielle, what do you think?
Well, if I say no, then I should just give up at this point. No, I you know, this has been like my
truth. No,
seriously, this is like my life's work. Like being within that space for the time that I was, and seeing and being exposed to the things that I was exposed to, and seeing the breakdown of just hurt and pain that happens within that space. You know, I have my own story of sexual harassment in the workplace that was pretty gnarly. California word there for everybody. And from my perspective now, I can look back and see where that was just a person who was hurting tremendously. And I wish I knew what happened to him from ages 3 to 7, right? Like those things you can have so much more compassion for and hold space for, and also hold people accountable to doing the work so those things don't happen again. And I think that we talked about this earlier as well, you know, these new tech companies that are doing heightened innovation, doing things that we never thought were possible. They are doing these programs, and you see their workplace wellness programs are so much more innovative, so much more outside of the box. And look at what's happening with their companies.
Right.
They're growing exponentially. They have crazy creative teams that are thinking of things that no one's thought of before. There is actual productivity benefit to doing this work, if someone needs us to put a number on it, that I think is really important to see. And if you say, well, my childhood was like pretty peachy, fantastic. Well, guess what? The last couple of years, we all went through trauma. Whether you thought you were going to lose your job, whether you thought that your company was going to have to fold, you were going to have to do layoffs, like every single human experienced trauma during that time. At home, at work, with uncertainty. So at this point, like literally no one has an excuse anymore to say that they don't need to do the work.
Absolutely.
That's sort of the, you know, the hill I'll die on, because I'm like, it's so important. And also when you see the benefits of the life you can have beyond that space, it's time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions. One is, from my perspective or my vantage from the companies that I have the pleasure of working with and observing, it seems like they fall in 2 camps. One camp is, we've been through something the last 2 years. Like, let's figure out how to collectively process, acknowledge, understand. And then there's the other camp that's like, well, we're pretty much back to normal. So like, let's just keep going. Nobody needs to talk about that over there. We're just going to keep moving. So how do companies who have never done this work, like what's the first step for a company who, if they have leadership that's aware enough to be like, oh God, we need to do something for our workforce? Because, you know, everyone's talking about the Great Resignation and people changing jobs and quitting and all of that. And people they can't find workers, all those things. The 3 of us, I think, know a pretty clear answer. But how do you help a leader understand, like, what's the first step? So your thoughts on that one, and then I'll ask you the
I mean, get help is the simple answer. If you think about being a leader, you're never going to have all the answers or all the talent. So if you're smart, you're going to surround yourself with people who know more than you do, who have done things you haven't done. And I don't like the are smarter than you, because I don't like the you're smarter, I'm smarter, but just balance out and round out. And there's a lot of people out there, and it might be a little trial and error, and maybe you might try some programs that don't work, but there are a lot of people like myself, like Danielle, like other businesses that do offer services in different manners that are available. And if this is not an area that you have experience with or expertise in, reach out, ask for help, right? And again, it's probably going to take different things for different companies. I think companies that are, you know, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, it might look a little different what you need compared to a startup that wants to build it into their DNA. But in general, there's a lot of companies out there that really care about making a difference. And some of them are also just still figuring it out. I mean, we're all figuring it out, right? Sure. So I say, you know, ask for the help, be open-minded to it might not be perfect the first time around, and you might have to try a few things. And recognize that your employees are begging for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you need evidence of it, look at your attrition rates, look
Right.
at people that are sick and going out on leave because they're sick,
Mm-hmm.
people that get burnt out,
Mhm.
unnecessary conflict that you have that requires then HR to step in and manage it,
Mm-hmm.
more harassment cases in the work. I
Mhm.
mean, the list goes on and on. Like,
Yeah.
your employees need it and they want it. They may not know exactly what they need or how to get it, but that's why people like Danielle and I are here.
Mm-hmm.
We can help you.
Absolutely.
I would say my biggest tip, and I used to always say this when I'd go into businesses, is your company is an organism.
Mm-hmm.
Every single human in here is a cell making this thing work.
Mm-hmm.
If you have someone on the team who's not operating properly because they are burnt out, because they're not, at the top of their game,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to infect everyone around them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all are energetically connected. We know this now. Our energy literally projects 15 feet off our bodies. We have studied it.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's in a negative vibration, it will affect your entire team. And so you get to choose, how are you going to feed that organism every day? How are you going to put goodness and nurture them and make it feel taken care of? Or else you get to have disease on your hands, which manifests as things not working, lack of creativity, all the things that Sasha just brought up with what she just shared. And also, you start with you. Can you go look in the mirror and see if you're showing up every day the way that you want to, with your family, with loved ones, with the people that you interact with? And if you can't say yes, then your company's probably not either, if you're leading that company.
Way to drop back to the inside job, Danielle.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Hats off to you.
Just circle back.
Yeah.
I would also say, like, generally speaking, culturally, there's a lot of, I don't know how I want to categorize it because I want to be delicate here, but like firms and investors that are putting money into or sitting on boards of companies also have to be bought in.
Mhm.
And there is a dynamic that has to change of, yes, a private equity or VC firm is going to put money in and want to see money out, but not at the cost of people. And I know that's a hard trade-off in business. There's a lot of hard trade-off decisions we have to make, but I believe there's a better way of doing it, and we just have to keep dancing with it and at least try to get better each time rather than just believe that the way we've been doing it is okay, because I don't believe that's true.
That's such a great point. And I don't know if you guys are familiar. There's a movement. It's a global movement at this point called conscious capitalism. And so the Arizona chapter was actually founded here in this Mac 6 building where we broadcast from. And so I've had the pleasure to be a part of many of the conferences and the national chapter and also the local chapter. And the whole premise is that your business is more than just profit, right? So you need to think about all your stakeholders, but a big piece of that for public companies and investment-backed companies is you're more than just your shareholders' returns, right? So to think about a longer-term perspective and how to really get people on board. And this movement has been going on for at least 20 years. And in the last maybe like the last 7 years, we've really seen a lot of momentum, bigger companies getting on board. John Mackey of Whole Foods was one of the co-founders of this movement, wrote a book, the Conscious Capitalism book. But really thinking about how do we help people have a longer term perspective, which then creates a more hospitable place for all of us humans to operate. So I think we're almost out of time, and I want to make sure that people know how to get a hold of both of you if this conversation resonated and they're like, hey, I need help. You both work individually with individuals, right, and with companies. So both of those are options. And then Sasha, also tell us how to get your wonderful book.
So The Inside Job is available pretty much anywhere you want to buy your books. So if you're a Barnes & Noble person or a Books A Million person or an Amazon person, it is available online at all of those locations. And if you really want a signed copy, you can contact me directly and I will ship you one, and I'll write any message you want as long as it's nice. And you can find me, I have a website, sashastair.com, and it, hopefully as it sounds, but I've seen some people at Starbucks write my name in some pretty crafty ways, so I'll spell it Sasha, Stair, Stair. And same thing for Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, like just that's the handle name for all of the above. So it keeps it pretty simple and clean.
Awesome. And Danielle, how can we find you?
Yes. So I'm old, just go full Instagram. Website's under construction right now. Very excited about the new rebrand we have going on.
Yay.
But my Instagram handle is This Is Danielle Nicole. I also am on LinkedIn as well. And if you go there, it just has, I have practices that I post every single week, reminders, things that you can go through, as well as links to join me for anything we have local here in Phoenix. But I also do virtual sessions and virtual speaking engagements with companies as well.
Oh, that's a great point, right? Because
Yeah.
you can do sessions anywhere in the
Absolutely.
world.
Yes.
So that's great.
And I should also plug, I can't believe I always forget this, the Monday Magic, which is,
yeah.
I know,
Thank
I
you for
always
reminding me.
like I should remember my own thing, but
It's so magical that
I know,
I
it's just, it's elusive. It's in an ether floating around somewhere in space. The Monday Magic is a newsletter that I write every Monday. I actually don't write on Monday. I usually write on Saturday mornings, but I post it on Monday on LinkedIn, and it's free. So you can subscribe. You can find it on either my LinkedIn page or just look for the Monday Magic. And for me, it was a way of like, Mondays always felt so dreaded, right? You're like, oh, the weekend's over, and like, ugh. So I wanted like a quick 2 to 5 minute read on, like how do we take back our Mondays, and grab your beverage of choice, sit down, get inspired for the week. It's a little thought provoking. I try to balance every other week, like 1 week's more fun, 1 week might be a little deeper. But really embodying the work of the inside job, so that you have it at your fingertips every week.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. So before we leave, one last question. What would be one tip that each of you could give somebody who's really starting this healing journey? I know it's a big one, but like, what's the one thing that you could suggest to somebody who's becoming more aware that they have some work to do?
I will say this quickly, but it's a longer process. 3 steps. Observe your thoughts, your environment, your body. Breathe after you do that. And then connect to something bigger than you, whether it is your family, your community, God, spirit, your choice. If you can do those 3 things, when you feel stressed, when you feel unsure, you will feel different.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm cheating too. I'm not doing one. So I would say first, be curious. I love that. This lady over here got me into Ted Lasso, so I'm all about
amazing.
believe, all about curiosity. So be curious, right? And I think when we're curious, that means we're open-minded. We're being compassionate with ourselves, with others. Be cognizant that change can happen right away and also doesn't happen overnight. And what I mean by that is it's a journey, not a destination. It's going to take time. And as you start to change, things around you will change. And that can be scary because people might not be as comfortable with you changing. And you need to be prepared for that and just be loving with yourself and with them, and understand that as things change, people get uncomfortable, and that's okay. And know that you're not alone. I never thought I would have ever shared my stories openly about sexual violence until I ran Jeans for Justice. And I'm so glad I did, because the more I have shared all stories, the more people come to me saying, oh my gosh, I'm so moved by what you shared. Now I want to share either with you or more publicly. And it's cathartic to get it out of our system. So if you feel like me and you're crazy and you want to share with everyone and scream it from the top of Camelback Mountain and you just don't care, share with everyone. But if you don't, pick a person for the love, like just anyone. I don't care. Pick the person that's your person that you go to, but share. Get it out of your body, get it out of your system. Have someone that's going to be there for you, be a mirror to you, but also remind you in the days that are really hard, which Danielle and I have done a lot over the last 6 months in particular for one another, that it's just a moment in time and it's going to pass and you're going to get through it and it's going to be okay, and you're doing all the things you can and you're doing the best you can with what you've got in any given moment.
I love it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Those are all reminders I needed to hear today. So thank you both for this session. See, this is why I invited you. I just get my own session.
That'll be $1,000 for therapy. No, just kidding. Just
Well, I'll checks in the mail. All right, ladies. Well, thank you so much for joining me this episode.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Oh, said the same thing.
Jinx.
You owe me a Coke.
You have been listening to the Messy Middle podcast and radio show, presented by Mother and Founder Co. We hope you have found a few pieces of wisdom to help you navigate your own messy middle. Be sure to subscribe to The Messy Middle on your favorite podcast platform, and follow Jen Burwell and Mother and Founder Co. on Instagram. Remember, Beginnings are usually scary, and endings can sometimes be sad, but it's the middle that counts the most. Until next time, stay curious, kind, and messy.